Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of Mostly Peaceful Latinas. I am Bella from
And
my
I'm
bedroom.
and I'm Linda from my new couch, actually, in my living room. Yeah. So we are gonna be doing the show today at home. But we have a lot to cover today. But before we move on to our topics, please don't forget to subscribe, share, and like. Oh wow. Oh, you know what? It's playing in my TV. I have no idea why. Let me just this is
Got
actually
the
playing on my TV
NPL
because I
turned
was
on.
watching, yeah, I was watching this like earlier on Candace Owens. But we have a lot to discuss. There's been so many news this week, and something that I think is pretty controversial right now is the fact that not Candace Owens, Ben Shapiro introduced a show about a day ago asking President Trump to pardon Derek Chauvin. So we're going to discuss that while we wait for some more people to come and we post on social. I'm going to post on my X account now. And we are also going to discuss Jasmine Crokett. I think that's how you say his last name. She is a Democrat who a lot of people are saying she's the new AOC and the rising star of the Democratic Party. We'll see how true that is. Also, the state of Florida, Ron DeSantis, and the new Attorney General, who are apparently launched a criminal investigation against Andrew Tate and also Tristan Tate here in the state of Florida. And let me see, what else do we have on the schedule? Oh, Gavin Newsom, who's all of a sudden conceding in so many topics. And he had a very interesting conversation with what is it called? With Charlie Kirk. He had a very interesting conversation with Charlie Kirk, where he basically became a moderate Democrat once again, because we can't even say conservative. A lot of the things that they were talking about, including men and women's sports and also defunding the police, are pretty common sense things. So I can't really say that that is a conservative stand or viewpoint as much as it's just common sense. So let me go post on X real quick so that people can join. I posted on my Instagram again. If you guys didn't catch our episode last week, we had Layla Sentner as one of our guests, as our guest. And she was actually a very interesting and knowledgeable and informational podcast. She is a very wealthy individual. And I mentioned this because she has access to a lot of alternative medical professionals and people that I think the average person does not. And therefore, she had a lot of information during COVID. She also became this kind of very controversial political figure during the lockdowns because she didn't allow her teachers to come back to school if they had gotten vaccinated. She went into quarantine, and the same thing with the children. So she talks about how she helped reverse her nephew's autism and a lot of interesting things that I think a lot of you would be interested on. So
Yeah,
give me a
definitely
second
check out
while I
that last
post.
episode. And
Uh-huh.
also check out the episode before that we did with Roger Stone and Jorge
Hmm.
Masvidal that we know a lot of you haven't seen.
Uh-huh.
The
Yes.
algorithm. So we're back, guys. Our producer couldn't be in the studio today, and we said, you know what? We're not going to let the audience down. We said MPL was back, so we're going to be back. And that's
Mm-hmm.
what we're doing today.
Yes,
We're just waiting
absolutely.
for a couple of more people to
Give
come into
me.
the chat. Drop a comment. Let us know what's going on. Let me go ahead and actually bring this up by Vanessa. Vanessa writes, he should not pardon Derek. He'll go to a state prison where he's definitely not going to be pardoned by Tim Walz. In fact, Derek is most likely safer in a federal versus state prison. That's definitely a perspective, Vanessa. We'll go into more detail in that now as more people start coming in to the chat. Yeah, TJ, it's definitely a little bit of a different setup, a little cozy, from home. Not the big fancy studio, but we'll be back in the studio next week. Want
Let
to
me
make sure that we
see.
gave you guys a show despite the studio not being available.
Live, hold on. Live on YouTube. Discussing. Are you on the oh, never mind, hold on.
Come on in, guys. Like this video and hit subscribe. We're
What else?
so close to 10,000 subscribers. So close to our little podcast. So help us out. If you haven't subscribed already, please do. If you haven't liked this video, please like it. Charles writes, he didn't do anything wrong, and the jury was pressured and threatened. And on top of that, autopsy was falsely reported on, and he died of an overdose and heart failure. A lot of interesting.
Is he talking about?
He's talking about George Floyd.
What is that noise? Is that you? Are those your dogs?
Well, it's not me, but it is my dog. So if you guys hear some snorting, some grunts,
that's funny as hell.
Five French bulldogs in the house, guys. Okay,
That's a lot. That's a lot. That's a lot.
Very aggressive lifestyle that I've chosen for myself. All right.
Well, all right, I posted this. Let me show you guys something. All right, so Ben Shapiro, out of all people, which is kind of very strange to me, I come to see, or he shocked the world when he decided to start a petition to get Trump to pardon Derek Chauvin. And I think there's a lot to say about 2020 and how politically motivated that entire trial was. I know that there was actually a lot of Black conservatives that came out and said this would be very bad for Trump. I think it's a bad PR move. And also, he has two different convictions. He has a state one and a federal one. And so if Trump was to actually pardon him at a federal level, allegedly or supposedly, he would still have to serve the his state sentence, which is I think 22 years. So I want to show you guys, this is what Ben Shapiro had to say at the very beginning of his show and where this whole controversy started. By the way, I already saw CNN saying that this is going to take Black people back 400 years into slavery, which is very interesting. I think that they don't realize, and I briefly had this conversation on my Instagram when RFK this week had a very bizarre post about anti-Semitism and racism being, comparing it to the plague and how it kills like people. A lot of people pushed back and said, well, anti-Semitism is a big deal in college campuses and it's spreading like wildfire, etc. We have to do something about it. And I said, the problem is when you force people to like a race or a religion, right? If it's not done organically, it could become more problematic. And I think that's really what happened in 2020. I think that a lot of people don't realize how ineffective the 2020 harassment campaign for BLM turned out to be. In fact, now in Washington, D.C., they're going to completely remove the BLM, the Black Lives Matter. How there was this big graffiti in the middle of like right by the White House. That has to go away per the Trump administration. So all of these things turn reversing. But anyways, let me stop talking. Let me show you guys what Ben Shapiro had to say. I'll probably just play like a minute of it because it's 3 minutes long.
It would be incredibly controversial, but I think that it's absolute.
Hold on.
If we are issuing pardons, however, there is one person that President Trump should pardon from federal charges forthwith. It would be incredibly controversial, but I think that it's absolutely necessary. That person is Derek Chauvin. President Trump should, in fact, pardon Derek Chauvin. He should. He should pardon him his federal charges. If we are talking about reversing the evils of the last several years in American life, obviously COVID and its handling was a massive evil. Destroyed the economy, set us on a path to fiscal insanity, destroyed children, led to massive health-related cover-ups, just horrifying all the way around. And President Trump has taken on a lot of those things. But when it came to BLM, the inciting event for the BLM riots that caused $2 billion in property damage in the United States and set America's race relations on their worst footing in my lifetime, was in fact the railroading of Derek Chauvin in the death of George Floyd. The evidence demonstrates that Derek Chauvin did not in fact commit murder of George Floyd. George Floyd was high on fentanyl. He had a significant pre-existing heart condition. George Floyd was saying he could not breathe before he was even out of the car. He was in the car saying he could not breathe. Derek Chauvin, for a large segment of even the tape that was shown, had his knee on George Floyd's shoulder or back, not on his neck. The autopsy of George Floyd showed that he had no damage to his trachea, that probably George Floyd died of excited delirium.
So it's a longer minute. I think he actually dedicated the entire show to this. And there's also a petition where he is asking President Trump to, pardon Derek Chauvin. And I just want to clarify on my notes that Derek Chauvin was sentenced to 22 and a half years in state prison for Floyd's murder. And he also received a 21-year federal sentence for violating Floyd's civil rights. Because remember, they didn't just make this into a murder case as much as it was a hate crime. And that's why his sentence that was that much harsher than it was. And also, a lot of people don't realize how incredibly biased and politically driven the entire court, it was the kangaroo court in, what was it, the state of Minnesota, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
Keith, the very controversial pro-Antifa DA was actually the one who'd made it very political and said from the very beginning that he was not going to, that he was going to be charged and he was going to be convicted. So I think a lot of the reactions, which I want to show you guys from the internet, were not very, from the right, you had a lot of people who said, this is the biopsy. It clearly shows that, he died from other causes. He had fentanyl before he was even strangled. The knee of Derek Chauvin wasn't actually on his throat. It was actually in his back. There's just a lot to it. But
there's also a lot of information that we have today that we didn't have at the time.
Yeah.
The fentanyl was something that if you tried discussing that in 2020, then it was you're racist, you don't think that Black people should exist or whatnot. And now with an autopsy report that proves that we were right, that there was a doses of fentanyl in his system that could have killed a small village, not just one person. I feel like those are things that are now inarguable. But we were talking about it earlier.
Oh, sorry, what is this? My bad. That's not for us. Sorry.
We were discussing earlier how in the past, in the history, whenever there's these huge cultural shifts, and we were talking about the Menendez brothers and the O.J. Simpson case, which were both to some degree influenced by the Rodney King riots, and the fact that for a very long time there was a Black community in Los Angeles that thought that white people just got away with crimes and Black people were the victim of all these things. And both of those verdicts have been attributed to being influenced by the blowback of the Rodney King riots, whether it was OJ, they acquitted OJ so that it wouldn't give the perception that they were persecuting a Black influential hero, sports, MVP of all time. And the Menendez brothers, how their story was very much villainized in the story, in the media, when they were presented like the privileged white guys. And it's unfortunate, but I think that that's part of what we've seen with Derek Chauvin, is that case was significantly more about the politicization of the death of George Floyd as much as it was his ability. Was he just doing his job that day?
And I just want to remind people that Derek Chauvin was actually stabbed 22 times in jail by a BLM activist. because this is how much hate was driven during 2020 against white people, specifically and particularly because of what happened to George Floyd. Now, it also goes, by the way, 22 times the guy in jail did it, I think, the day after Thanksgiving, because it was a symbolic connection to the Black Lives Matter movement and the black hand symbol associated with the Mexican gang. So this was like, the guy is convicted, he goes to jail, and then he gets stabbed 22 times by a BLM activist. I think this also goes to show that do we really have like a justice system, or do we have activist judges, which is a really big deal. And it's something that right now we're seeing it with the Doge situation, and they're trying to block Trump everywhere in different states because they're not really there for justice. They're just there to be activists. And that was all of 2020. Everywhere we looked in 2020, it was activist judges throughout the entire country.
Well, activist everything, right? Like we saw politicians taking a knee, judges taking a knee, law enforcement taking a knee. It's like it all became all of these institutions that should, since the beginning of time, were supposed to remain unpartisan, not show any kind of like political affiliation. Unfortunately, BLM became very politically affiliated with the left. And what we saw was that it all became one giant form of activism. I mean, there's other places, including here in Miami, where maybe the insanity only lasted for a very short amount of time, but nonetheless,
about 2 days.
Right.
About 2 days. In his autopsy, which I don't know why I can't like link it here. I'm sure you guys have seen it. It shows you the toxicology report. All of this, by the way, there's a documentary on the Daily Wire that Candace Owens did. I forgot the name of the documentary in the Daily Wire. It's a really good documentary. When she goes to, where he died, I think she interviews like, I'm not sure if it was family members or people in that area. And she just, puts a different perspective and how this entire, thing was politicized. What I don't know this because I would have to ask probably like a lawyer or someone else. What happens if Trump does pardon him, and what happens to his state sentence? Like, does it even matter? Could that be overturned if possible? Like, what is the course of action? Because if you do get pardoned federally, but you still have to serve those 21.5 years in a state, for your state sentence, then does that even matter?
Then it doesn't even matter.
Does anybody know?
The pardon or not?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I was asking people today.
Would he also have to receive a state pardon? Is that how that works? Or does the federal pardon kind of like trump it?
I don't know. I was trying to research online today and I didn't really find much, but people just saying that it would just be pointless, as TJ saying. I think I went to the comments of Ben Shapiro because there was a lot of pushback from the right as well. And I found Nick Fuentes in the comments telling Ben Shapiro that he's an obvious attention grabber. Nobody has forgotten that in 2020, you believe George Floyd and everybody, you believe George Floyd and told everyone to get vaccinated. This is a cynical ploy to salvage your dying fan base, which I honestly think it's true. I do think that the Daily Wire is going through some shit, but that's not what the show is about, and I don't really care. But there are 3 tweets from Ben Shapiro in 2020. The first one saying, government has one priority function: to prevent a violation of rights to life and liberty. A police officer destroyed George Floyd's rights. That is no excuse for a government abandoning citizens' rights to life and liberty in favor. So he has had a completely different perspective on George Floyd as well as vaccines back in 2020.
When was that original tweet? When was that original tweet that you just read?
That was in 2020 from Ben Shapiro. And then Fuentes is just calling him out, saying that this is just a ploy to try to get the attention of people. Like, if you look at Ben Shapiro's YouTube numbers compared to Candace Owens, who's completely independent, I mean, it doesn't even compare. You know, it's like Ben Shapiro's kind of like dying down, you know? So yeah, that is
Well, I mean, you can't even compare right now though, because Candace has kind of hit like a mainstream, truly
she's
nonpartisan niche right now. I mean, she's talking about celebrity gossip and culture. She's obviously going to have a further reach because I feel
she
can't compare it to like a political podcast at this point. It's a truly pop culture, more leaning towards pop culture.
Yeah. So it's been interesting the last couple of days, you know, moving on from this topic. It's been interesting the last couple of days since Andrew Tate came back to Florida, how everybody has reacted from high-level politicians, a lot, you know, within the Republican Party, within also influencers. I mean, just everybody has a different opinion, whether good or bad, about Andrew Tate. But immediately upon, because it was kind of like a surprise, I guess, you know, they didn't tweet for like 2 days because they're always on Twitter, Andrew and Tristan. And, you know, for 2 days, nobody had heard of the Tate brothers until somebody said they were actually on their way back to the United States on a private jet, which shocked the world, I guess, and especially their haters, because they thought that they were just going to be on house arrest until the trial in Romania, I suppose, and then would be jailed. And that's not what's happening. And the first thing that during a press conference, they asked Ron DeSantis, I don't know if this was like a planted question by his media allies, like they used to do. Remember, they used to do that with like Will Witt and stuff.
Right,
they were like,
you know, it was.
Well, was it? Who asked the question? I don't know that. Was it?
I'm sure that it was. Yeah, but the press did ask. They're like, oh, well, the Tates are on their way to Florida. What do you have to say about that? And I think that this was after the Tampa Bay YRs, which was a pretty big deal online. It got a lot of attention when the Tampa Bay YRs addressed it, and they said that they put out a message welcoming the Tates to Florida.
And welcoming them and inviting them to talk at their club. So we hear from Ron DeSantis, and Ron DeSantis says we're not welcome here. Well, they are American citizens. You know, I think it's funny, but we were laughing, like, you know, on the phone and stuff. Like, what the fuck is DeSantis doing? Like, you may not like Andrew and Tristan Tate. We may not like them at all. You may think they're immoral, whatever it is. But they are U.S. citizens, and you know, you can't prohibit citizens from entering their country. So I think
he said something along the lines of, "Nobody let me know that they were coming."
Yeah, I mean,
there had to be like a special alert to the governor when somebody is entering the country.
But we had nothing to do with this. We had nothing, which, you know, goes back to the divide and the perpetual backstabbing of Ron DeSantis against Donald Trump. The average person looks at this and doesn't think much of it, just thinks it's the governor. They asked him a question, and you know, he doesn't like Andrew Tate because of the allegations of rape, human trafficking, child exploitation, whatever it may be, and everyone just goes on with their day. But when you look deeper, like we have on this show, and I know that we're just getting our stuff started, but there was a point in time when we were very consistent, and we were always telling you guys things that were going to happen before they actually happened. We were ahead of the curve, and we were telling you things about Ron DeSantis. This is a PR ploy. This is exactly what it is. You know, I was with somebody else when we heard Ron DeSantis. We played that clip, like a minute clip, for like 3 times. Nobody let me know. Oh, wasn't it with Dilly when we were at Dilly's house that Dilly started analyzing and said,
"No, I don't think we were with Dilly. I know who we were with. I know who you were with."
Okay, well, it was like, oh, I know why Ron DeSantis is saying this, because he wants to make sure that people don't think that he had anything to do with this, and they're just going to blame the Trump administration.
Well, I think that he was,
you know,
because we already know how his PR team works, they keep an ear to the ground. As news is trending, they're always trying to find an opportunity to create a headline, a PR stunt, whatever it may be. So when the news breaks of the Tates, there's a lot of mystery around it. How were the Tates granted permission? Is
Right.
it Trump's? Are they here to meet with
Okay.
Donald Trump?
Right.
Is it Grinnell? What kind of approval are they going to Mar-a-Lago? There's like a lot of conversation. They landed in Fort Lauderdale, so they're going to Mar-a-Lago, and there were
Yeah.
all of these conversations linking the president with the Tate bros, which that's a whole other conversation in themselves, because I don't think there's any true evidence to show that took place. But I feel like at that opportunity, his PR team sees that there is a backlash. People online are like, absolutely not, we don't want any involvement with the Tates, and so they capitalize on that opportunity to be like, this hurts Trump, and as a result of it potentially hurting Trump, then I'm going to use it to be the opposition to that, which is a tale as old as time that we've seen repeated with the governor many times. So it does end up being bigger than that. It's not just about, I've got a moral responsibility to go after these alleged human traffickers. Now we're discussing the governor looking at it an opportunity as like the Tates are free press. It's a hot, trending, hot button topic that's easy to get eyes on. So now when you have the governor taking a stance like that, you've got people all over the country watching that, really all over the world. You couldn't pay for that kind of press. You couldn't pay for that kind of exposure. So to me, and this was a comment that I put out, all great. However you feel about Tate, all fine and dandy. Charges, okay, fantastic. The problem is that this is a movie we've seen so many times before with Ron DeSantis. There's a reason why I've referred to him as the bare minimum for a very long time, because he will consistently take these grand stances on these very controversial topics as, I'm going to do this, I'm going to rule with an iron fist, I'm going to get the AG to do an investigation, only for a year and a half from now for something to fall through the cracks, the court to turn it down, an investigation to be shut down, like we saw with Our House Wynwood, like we saw with the liquor license in the Hyatt, like we saw with the lawsuits against Disney, like we saw with the investigation against the assassination attempt on Trump's life. It's just one after another, these circumstances where he uses it to create these big, fancy political headlines, and then it doesn't really go anywhere.
Yeah, I don't really understand what it is that they're investigating. I do understand the human trafficking, rape allegations, etc., that they have in Romania, but the Attorney General of Florida didn't actually say much, except, actually, let me read this tweet to you guys. Here it is. Last week, I directed my office to work with our law enforcement partners to conduct a preliminary inquiry into Andrew and Tristan Tate. Based on a thorough review of evidence, I've directed the Office of Statewide Prosecution to execute search warrants and issue subpoenas in the now active criminal investigation into the Tate brothers. What I find really funny today is that the Andrew Tate put out a tweet that, it was good to see you, Florida, see you in a few years or something, and then everybody jumped into conclusions saying that the Tates were running away from justice here in the state of Florida, but in reality, the Tates are going to the UFC in Las Vegas, and they'll be back next week into Florida. So I can't wait till they see that, because it just goes to show you that Ron DeSantis creates this perception online, and people think that they're finally going to get the justice that they deserve or that they're hoping for, but in reality, nothing substantial is going to happen, and nothing will happen.
Hit. It's just a dopamine.
It's a dopamine hit.
They're going to hold the Tates accountable, and then.
I mean, I was dying laughing, and like I didn't want to like say anything, because I actually knew a lot of people in the comments that I'm like cool with and friends with, but I went to see the comments under when I was taking screenshots of the tweets today. I went to see comments under the Attorney General's posts just to see like who was in the comments and what they were saying, right? And it was so funny, because it's like all these people like, thank you for standing up to like women and children and all this stuff. And I'm like, guys, nothing is going to happen. Like, we have been there. We have been in this position with Ron DeSantis so many times where he hypes things up and nothing ever comes out of it. But yeah, it's pretty funny what's going on.
Let's give a a little shout out here to Mark Anthony Salvid. He says, Linda and Bella, great job on the consistent great work. Would you ladies say that he's just fishing for headlines? And Mark,
Yeah.
thank you so much for the contribution, guys. Remember, no Illuminati, no lizard people, just the mostly peaceful Latinas funding the show so that we can keep a loud voice of representation for you guys. So any contribution that you guys make to our show help to fund the production. Doesn't sound like a lot of production value today, but we're in the studio.
We're in the studio. It's a lot. Yeah, we have a producer. We have all the cameras, the microphones, the lights.
It doesn't pay itself.
Yes.
So we appreciate any contribution that you guys make to us to keep our show afloat, that we can take weeks and weeks and months off, and that you guys still continue to remain loyal to us and come and you find us and find our content. So we love you and appreciate you so much. But yeah, Mark, we really do think that he's just fishing for headlines. We think it's very cheap publicity. Why not? The Tates are a trending topic. And as soon as you have this very kind of like controversial grandstanding position on it, then logically you're going to get a lot of international press around it. But you know, Linda and I were discussing earlier where this has the potential to truly backfire on the governor, because it's putting him in the world stage to do what we've already said that he's done so many times before, which is where he doesn't fully follow through on the promises that he makes in regards to these grandstanding positions. You know, to me, one of the biggest ones is the investigation against the attempt on Donald Trump's life. The second one that occurred here in Florida, where he said that he would be launching an independent investigation in the state of Florida. And now they never spoke about it again. If you ask them about it, they're like, well, the FBI said that we couldn't, whatever it was. So, you know, I think it is going to be interesting to kind of watch the public pressure mount against Ron DeSantis and have it not materialize into something, particularly at right around the time when we will be entering the height of the midterm primaries.
Well, you know, someone made a point. I posted the news about the tape rose of the investigation on my story, and I had a few comments, especially from this one human trafficking like activist that follows me, and she's always complaining about the state of Florida having like one of the worst, like not just human trafficking problems, but child exploitation as well. And I mean, I'm talking about, she's been documenting this shit for years. Like she's been following me for a very long time. And she replies back to my story saying, you know, this is just a plot or a ploy of Ron DeSantis to get the favor of women, because he is going to launch, or he's going to help launch his wife's campaign for governor. And I couldn't agree more, to be honest with you. And I think that's really what it is, where she's able to draw the line between, or he's able to draw the line between, this is where I stand and where this is where Donald Trump stands, which is
and
with the tape rose. Right. Well, yeah, you know, because you know, a lot of Trump supporters are not just like Tate fans, but also heavily invested in the persecution, whether you think it's legal or illegal, of those two brothers. There's a lot of them kind of, it's reminiscent of what happened to Donald Trump throughout the last 4 years before he got back into the White House. So, you know, I
many times that's part of the concern with Tate, right? Which is that, has he kind of found this very, I hear mine snorting down here. Has he found this just,
so you guys can meet Lordy,
way of protecting himself from any shots that are launched at him by simply kind of like putting on the attacks that Donald Trump has had as a cloak and be like, I'm attacked by the Matrix. In reality, Donald Trump is attacked by the Matrix. But if you say I'm attacked by the Matrix just like Donald Trump is, now it makes you relatable to a group of individuals that have suffered to some degree a collective trauma bond with Donald Trump as a result of the persecution that we've witnessed have to go through.
Yeah. We'll see what happens. But I think once people realize that Andrew and Tristan Tate are just traveling to Vegas for the UFC fight this weekend, it's going to be a funny meltdown on Twitter, which is where all of the meltdowns take place. I think you're right, TJ, by the way. There are too many people that are heavily invested with the Tate bros, and it's coming from somebody who doesn't like the Tates. I agree. There's people that have let their entire personality be this man, which is pretty bizarre. But you know, speaking about bizarre, I saw a clip, which we'll play in a little bit, of Charlie Kirk on the new Gavin Newsom podcast. And I don't know if we were able to cover Gavin Newsom on the show or if that was just me on my story on Instagram. But I do have to say that we had been seeing, and I think Bella and I maybe just internally on the phone, the rebrand of Gavin Newsom and the potential for him to be the top contender of the Democratic Party 2028 ticket. A lot of people say no. I had a lot of pushback today when I said I think he has a good chance against Republicans in 2028. So many people just said no, absolutely no way. He has the same charisma as Tim Walz. The more that people hear about him, the less you're going to like him. You know, they mentioned the state of California. They mentioned the homelessness, how expensive it is. Also the California wildfires. So there's obviously a lot of pushback, but I just want to remind people that mostly everybody that you know has a short-term memory. There are people who don't give a shit about COVID anymore. They don't care. They don't care if the vaccine killed people. They don't care if they shut you down. If they your school was shut down forever. If you couldn't visit your grandparents in the hospital. If you couldn't go to their funeral. If you couldn't be with your wife while she was giving birth. People don't give a shit. They don't care if your business was shut down, if you're a mask forever. In 8 years, COVID, like think about it. In 8 years, in 4 years, people are going to forget about the California wildfires. And for sure, people are not going to bring up the lockdowns. Like this is going to be the least of their concerns. And I think Bella, we'll play the clip, but I think Bella has a really good, I would say, description of what we envision is the class warfare that will be the 2028 campaign or the election between a California white elitist Democrat,
raised elitist,
and versus JD Vance, who's
Appalachian Mountain, from nothing, a drug addicted mom. And I think that when we've talked about this before, is I genuinely foresee that we're going to see a class-based election. There was a huge emphasis on age this election cycle. Biden was too old. Trump was too old. We're tired of old. We're tired of old. And now we have JD Vance, a millennial, and we've got what seems to be the potential contender for the Democratic Party, which is Gavin Newsom. Both young guys, both with plenty of life left in them. So then what does that leave the race coming down to? And Linda and I have strongly speculated that, and mark this down, bookmark this, because it will come up in the 2028 elections. We're going to see a huge emphasis on classism. Who comes from poverty, who's like the true pick yourself up from your bootstraps type of individual versus somebody like a Gavin Newsom, a political dynasty, silver spoon, luxury, wealth, and which side can really represent America's best interest. I mean, he's going to have a difficult time because of that. Luckily, he's very charismatic and good looking. And I mean, let's play this clip. I think that it's kind of hard not to be like, he's a cool guy. I'd have a beer with him.
Yeah, I do too, actually. Play it. Did not play.
Why isn't it playing? Oh, come on. Come on. All right, hold on. Let's try this one more time. Let me bring it back in.
In the meantime, you guys can meet Lordy, my beautiful cat Lordy.
Kratzy and Myra out there right now? Democrats I respect. Oh yeah, Bobby Kennedy
type?
I respect. Tulsi Gabbard.
Why are you laughing? Why are you smiling?
Because like they're on our team now because you guys kicked out like your best people. It's like the people that were into. This is a great point though, Governor. Is that Bobby Kennedy was a heterodox opinion on a thing that a lot of people were concerned about. Get him out. He's an anti-vaxxer. Yeah. Tulsi Gabbard, who is an anti-war. Get her out. She's a Russian agent. Yeah. Do you guys see how you have an unhealthy purification process where eventually you're left with just a 31% approval rating and a bunch of people that are talking to each other? And meanwhile, we're the ones that have Democrats in our cabinet winning the electoral majority vote, because there needs to be said, if Democrats are serious about being a majority party ever again, look at that ideological diversity.
So they're having this conversation, and it's interesting. I didn't realize that it cut off so soon, but he tells Gavin Newsom, you know, we are the party of we are the truly inclusive party. And Gavin Newsom almost has to like chuckle and be like, look at you. Like, you're using our own. He's like conscious of the fact you're using our own language against us. And I think that what we're seeing, this is what, his second episode on the podcast, Linda?
Yeah, or it may actually be his first one. I'm not sure. I think this is like a new thing.
I think it's incredibly telling that he chose to reach across the aisle. In another clip, they discuss the podcast circuit. His son's like obsessed with Charlie Kirk. His son is obsessed with Charlie Kirk and was asking him like what time he was going to get there. And, you know, Gavin Newsom said that it was unfair for trans women to play in women's sports, which is something that the Democratic Party, a hill that they were willing to die on. He did clarify, he's like, you know, at the same time, there has to be some sort of like sympathy for these individuals that, if not treated correctly, will kill themselves, because obviously that's the trans, manipulation tactic. If you don't give me this, if you don't give me inclusion, we will kill ourselves, right? Which he also goes on to mention a study on their own that the transitioners have an even higher risk of schmimicide than those that prior to transitioning.
Gavin Newsom also walked back his support for defunding the police. He said it was lunacy. He also said, walked back. He doesn't want to be associated or use the term Latinx anymore. By the way, his wife was like the first lady to actually go by first person. People don't remember how woke things have been for the last couple of years, when you had Gavin Newsom's wife, the first lady of California, change her name, or what is it called? Her gender, her pronoun, to first person of California as opposed to first lady. This is at the height of cancel culture. This is during 2020. I mean, you know, it's ridiculous, but at the same time, I don't think that a lot of these things are going to matter come 2028. And there is not a very big, but the dissident right, and we've seen it with this white nationalist, what is it called? William Spencer, is that his name? Spencer, right? The guy that was involved in Charlottesville. Whatever, he's like a very famous white nationalist, where there is a growing support on the right, the dissident right, for Gavin Newsom. And I know some of it was facetious and it was just the Groypers being funny. By the way, if you guys don't know who the Groypers are, they're followers of Nick Fuentes, who's a very controversial streamer, white nationalist, known for hanging out with Kanye West, for blaming everything on the Jews, etc. More of a comedian, in my opinion. But, you know, a lot of these white nationalists look at Gavin Newsom and say he's polished. He I don't know why.
It was the meme. We saw there was a meme that went around in the election cycle in this last election cycle by the groupers. I'm like my own spell check now. That's how it spells it on my phone. And it was a picture of JD Vance with his beautiful wife and his beautiful children, and then the picture of Gavin Newsom with his wife and his beautiful family. But because one of them is white, blonde-haired, Aryan looking, and JD Vance has a brown wife, it's almost like the dissident right was making the argument that almost accidentally Gavin Newsom had ended up representing their values more so than JD Vance, who had married a brown woman and outside of his race. So make no mistake, it's an argument that they'll definitely get ready to make. And
they're going to make the race argument. And I think that there's also a growing resentment from the dissident right, and even I'd say some of just the right in general, where we saw with the H-1B visas. That was I wish we would have been recording, because Bella and I were on the opposite end of that fight. We weren't, it's not that we're, or at least I'll speak for me and she can, give you her perspective, but it's not that we were siding with the H-1B or wanting expansion of it, more so of clarifying, hey guys, a lot of these problems that you guys are saying you have are completely fucking made up or misconstrued, or you're not giving context.
Well, we did have the unique perspective that because I'm in my day job, I do employment services, and it is my job to have a pulse on the job market. As soon as the conversation came up, I told Linda, I'm like, the companies pay a lot of money to recruit Americans from other American companies because the demand in the fields are so much higher than the people that can fill these jobs. So by the time that they get to an H-1B visa, it's almost always out of desperation. That's not their first choice. It's just that there's not enough Americans to fill these jobs.
Right.
And,
but
we ended up on the opposite. We accidentally ended up on the opposite side of the conversation, where everybody's like, oh, well, you're not America first. But the conversation that was being had was very much this anti-Indian,
kind of like a racist standpoint, which, that's not where I want to go. But I do want to say there is a portion of the right, especially on Twitter, where they're starting to get resentful of the Republican Party being more inclusive to not just minorities, but other people, and welcoming even Democrats. And they're saying, well, we don't want that. We want this to be a more race-based movement where we are prioritizing white Americans. That was a discussion that we had with the H-1B visas. The reality is that not enough white people are going for these tech jobs. Not, when you look at the right as it is, and the message that has been pushed on young people for the last 8 years through organizations and, mouthpieces like Charlie Kirk, who's a great American. I respect them so much. But Charlie has had this idea, or, has echoed plenty of times, that white men should not go to school, that white men should go for trade jobs, that they should be plumbers and electricians and have blue collar jobs. And that's great. Like, that's awesome. Like, we're not taking that away from anybody, but the reality is that there has to be a mixture of that and then white collar jobs, and then obviously above that as well. Like, we can't just tell the entire youth, especially white Americans, that they should just be plumbers and electricians. We need that. And you can become a millionaire by doing that. This is there was a Time magazine article, I think, of the new class of millionaires are actually blue collar workers. So it has nothing to do with that. But then you can't complain where the majority of our population is seeking these blue collar jobs. You can't complain with the Chinese and the Indians are going for the tech jobs, and then you're being replaced. There has to be an encouragement for young men and conservatives to take over educational institutions again, and to say, even if you don't believe in NASA and the moon landing, whatever it is, you're still going to need astronauts. You're still going to need scientists. You're still going to need coders. All of these things. And as we go into the future with artificial intelligence and everything else, we're going to need, more people in tech, even if it's just to repair Elon's robots. Like, there's still going to be a need. No, I swear to God, there's still going to be a need for that. So, I think that we could see even a sect of the right shift towards a Democratic support if Gavin Newsom is able to appeal to them. I think based on race alone, I swear to God,
No,
I swear,
there's gonna be
I genuinely think, bookmark this, that some of them will vote for Gavin Newsom based on that alone. So
let's take a moment to highlight our friend David Berg. Once again, Sky, our podcast is completely self-funded, so it's because of the
thank
contributions.
you, David. Seriously.
That keep
We're trying to
us
get into
funded.
the
So
algorithm
everybody
again.
in the chat, thank you to David. Please shoot David a thank you for helping us keep the lights on at MPL Studios. This is not a
Yes.
studio, so we'll be in the studio next week. He says,
We
I'm
will be.
glad to have you both back weekly now during the new golden age. And damn right it is. I'm not too familiar with the Tate's case, but I'm also not that surprised about DeSantis's reaction to them being in Florida. But I was a little taken back by Byron Donald's reaction to it. What are your thoughts? So my thoughts are that so first let's go back to Donald Trump. Donald Trump, we know that one of the very special things that he did during this election cycle was the podcast, the podcast bro cycle
yes.
that he went on, right?
Mhm.
And that was really something that had never been done before, that really stood out. And I think that it's almost undeniable to admit that there is definitely overlap between Andrew Tate's following and a lot of this like podcast pro following, the Theo Vons and the Joe Rogans of the world, and so on and so forth. And to me, I think that part of what we're seeing is that there's a double-edged sword situation going in. If you say that, and I'm talking about Trump before I get to the Byron Donalds point. If you go out there and you're like, oh, well, screw the Tates and they're no good or whatnot, now what you risk is that the Tates turn on you publicly and make it their mission to actively turn their following against you. And now they've got the 2 years, but more specifically, what a lot of people don't think about is we need to be very careful, because the majority that we have right now is very easy to lose, because we will not have Donald Trump to run on a ticket in 4 years. We won't have a Trump running on the ticket in 2 years. So I think that there's a certain cautiousness from Team Trump where don't align, but don't malalign either, because you don't want this guy to now make it his brand to go up against Donald Trump. With that being said, Ron DeSantis sniffs out this what's a weakness of sorts. It's, well, Donald Trump is now in a position where he can't he can't prioritize, and frankly he shouldn't. I mean, he's stopping wars, closing our border, stopping from coming in. The Tates are not gonna Donald Trump. It's just not for real. So there's no need for him to reference it. However, it was a perfect opportunity for Ron DeSantis to bring it up. They're coming into the state of Florida. He knows that he's got an election for his wife that he's going to be launching in a couple of months. And I think that he was in a position to gain more from going up against the Tate bros. What I think happened with Byron Donalds is that Byron Donalds is running here in the state of Florida. He's not on any podcast bro circuit. In fact, quite the contrary. They're trying to paint him as this liberal from New York. Like, you're not even a true Floridian. You're not from here. You're from New York, which is ironic because Casey is not from Florida either.
Where is she from?
I think she's from Ohio. Until she came to school here,
really?
which is the same story with Byron Donalds. He was from New York until he came to school here. I mean, the only thing that he has.
Well, a lot of people move and run for office.
A lot of people, you know, he met his wife. They went to FSU together. I'm sorry for him. I'm a Canes fan, but him and his wife met in FSU, and he's lived here since. He started off as an activist, part of the Freedom Caucus. I mean, the guy's been involved in politics pretty much since the beginning of his political interest. But I think that part of what
she's from Ohio,
part of what we're watching, David, is that he needs to be able to keep up with that messaging. And to him, the Tate approval rating isn't that important. Those aren't the voters that he needs to mobilize here in Florida. So I think that where it and
it's also it's also a division of, like, this is, you know, like my followers said, they're trying to appeal to women because it's a woman who's going to run for governor.
Correct.
You understand what I mean? So we're going to stand up against the human traffickers. We're going to stand up against the rapists and all, you know, all these allegations against these two men. And I think that they're trying to make that distinction. What I don't think they understand is how bad this looks on the governor. You are weaponizing the state's, you know, not just your tax dollars, but the state's, you know, judicial system, whatever you want to call it, to go after these two controversial influencers for what? Do you see how bad? Like it's almost like they didn't learn.
You're not
exactly.
You're not supposed to do that, because then you guys have to consider what stops a governor in a liberal state from saying, well, we're going to do this to a conservative in the future.
We're going to look into Charlie Kirk.
You can't have a governor weaponize
whatever it may be
your office to go after a private citizen, a private entity. You just can't have somebody weaponized. Be okay with that. And might I add, because once again, people have a very short memory. Linda and I spoke about this in the past when we were talking about the fight against Disney. And we weren't even critical of the governor back then. We were very supportive of the governor, but we understood where it's like, this is problematic, because you can't have the governor decide that you don't like the private policy that's being enacted by a private company and say, I'm going to use my power and influence in the governor of my governor's office to go after this private company. You don't want to set that kind of precedence. Whether or not you culturally agree with the decisions or the reason why, it doesn't change the fact that we should not be cheering on governmental overreach like that, because it sets a bad precedence.
Well, I saw that a few hours ago, the James Uthmere, I think that's how you say his last name, is Attorney General of Florida, tweeted again against the Tate Bros. And it was actually really funny.
I've actually got it right here. Let me put it up.
He was like, you can't flee from justice or something. Like, you can't escape our jurisdiction, or, you know, where is it? Oh my God, there it is.
Fleeing our jurisdiction will not stop Florida's ongoing criminal investigation. We will continue working with our law enforcement and partners around the world to fight human trafficking and sexual abuse. Very cool.
They're in Vegas, by the way. They're in Vegas. I saw a post.
You want me? And here's the thing: we're on the ground. We're talking to voters what they actually care about. You want me to tell you what Florida voters care about? HOAs, insurance crisis, like the very boring things that are maybe super boring to the average person in Florida. The important things right now that people care about affecting their lives day to day: HOAs and insurance companies. Not single person outside of the Twitter sphere prioritizes the conversation around the Tates.
Yeah, and I think, you know, with the little, what is it that we call him, the meatball tyrant?
The little meatball tyrant.
The meatball tyrant. You know, I think that with the little meatball tyrant is that this is going to backfire again. I want to read Nelson's comment, which says, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy for the Tates. And hi, Nelson, how are you? I hope we see you soon. They keep getting attention because we give it to them. I agree. I'm actually on the bus online where I've seen accounts that I liked and used to interact with, and people that I personally follow for other stuff whose entire personality has become Andrew Tate. And it's not only embarrassing, but it's exactly what he said they do. He's like, you know, they can't stop talking about me, and they can't.
Well,
right? It's like the same stuff.
They've already figured out that this is how they do it. The haters keep on.
Yeah, but it's the same thing for any haters, no matter where you stand, right? So Candace Owens is more popular than ever and has been able to transition politics and go into pop culture. Now she's doing an investigative series against the First Lady of France, getting 2.5 million views. Now she's doing Harvey Weinstein. She was canceled from the Daily Wire, and even, I would say, mainstream conservative politics. She wasn't at AmFest when I was there in Arizona as a speaker. She's not invited to CPAC anymore because she, you know, questioned Israel, because she talked about Jewish people. But it doesn't matter, because she now is the voice of the people. And if you go to the comment sections of Twitter, it's a bunch of even liberals who have to agree with Candace Owens, right? So I think that, you know, whether it's the Tates, whether it's Donald Trump, whether it's Candace Owens, Kanye West, any of these controversial figures, the more you give them attention, like they're haters, the bigger the problem becomes. Because now we're finding out through Roger Stone. Roger Stone posted it today, that it was in fact Rick Grenell who helped, what do you say, like, to help sway the Romanian embassy to, start dropping the charges, or, he worked in behalf
to travel in order for them to come handle their civic case. I still have questions about that though, on that end, because Roger doesn't really give any source. Like, I spoke to Rich Grenell, this was the statement. I think it's continuing to build off the press that has been covered over the last 2 weeks, where they said that the Trump campaign was in communications, but then when they asked Rich Grenell was like, while I support the Tate, I'm not in conversation with anybody. There was a conversation that took place in passing, coming out of an elevator. So I've got questions for Roger on whether or not, but I still feel like if there were charges to file against the Tates here in Florida, and they were authentic, because I go back to our history with Ron DeSantis, I feel like that's something that would have been filed quite some time ago. I feel like the victim.
I mean, they've known about the Tates for at least 2 years, and it's something that I've actually mentioned to people, because there are accusers who are from Florida, and I say, well, the best chance that any human trafficking victim will have is in the United States of America.
Yeah. You've been
don't count on Romania, don't count on Colombia, don't count on Ukraine. These are all corrupt countries. Judges can be bought. If you want to get real justice, you would seek it in America. This is where you'll have the strongest laws. You have states like Florida, etc. So we'll see what happens with that. I wanted to read, David says, totally agree. I'm not a fan of the Taste, but the statements of the government leaders saying they are not welcome in Florida is stuff I've never seen before. Yes, they are, absolutely bizarre. Ale, it's good to see you here. I haven't seen you in a while. YouTube is being a jerk and not sending the notifications. I appreciate you guys. I appreciate you guys being here today. We're just trying to get back into the groove of things. And we're trying to get back our audience. We're trying to get back into the algorithm. It's very difficult, especially when you take a long pause from streaming, because people are already watching somebody else. They forget that you exist. It's just like anything else. You have to, remind them. We are still fighting to get our Instagram back. I don't think we're going to get it back. It's been a year and a half.
It's been too long, but I think we're in a position where we can probably create
start another one. But we've been streaming for an hour and talking shit, and we just want to let you guys know, whoever's here, that we appreciate you so much. We are going to start recording for sure every single Thursday. If we don't do a live, we will launch an episode just like we did last week with the Layla Sentner one, and be consistent. So thank you guys for tuning in today. Please don't forget to subscribe, to share, to like, and help us grow our channel. And Bella,
and our brand. Yeah.
You wanna say anything else?
We love you guys. We're grateful that you stick it out with us. Despite the constant the fact that we take breaks, that we get deplatformed, that you can find us on Instagram one day, then we're not there anymore. We just appreciate you guys really just kind of like having our backs and sticking through us. We were a little concerned when we saw the numbers for last week's episode, and then from 1 minute to the next, the numbers went up. Linda and I were talking about it today, and we're like, all right, we're still there holding on, which means that you guys want to continue to see our content, which means that we're going to continue to put it out. I don't know if I think that's it. I mean, we were going to discuss a little bit of Jasmine Crokett, but I don't know if we've got a little bit of time on that. But we're just very eternally grateful for you guys and the support that you continue to show us. And we want to continue to keep this going. Especially, I think that the collectiveness of our culture, where it is that we're shifting, particularly as Trump comes to the end of his 4 years and we start seeing that, we think that there's a big need for voices like ours, and we just always appreciate that you guys show us support and encourage us.
All right, guys. Thank you, and we will see you next week. Bye.